Our next speaker is Ray Haddad. Ray is the lead trainer and managing director of Food Surety Limited. He specializes in food safety, food defense, and food fraud prevention. He's worked in quality roles, auditing, training, and advisory projects supporting a number of organizations in New Zealand, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. Ray will talk to us about another passion of mine called HACCP, or HACCP. Ray, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jack, and hello, everybody. And it is definitely a great day today. Thanks for all the speakers, and thanks for each one of you for being here, of course. So, HACCP. The good old, right? It's not as exciting as food safety culture and food defense and food fraud prevention because we know it. But the question for you today is, do we really know HACCP fully? And I hope the answer is yes. And I also hope that you will pick up something out of this presentation. So let's dive into it. A question for you to reflect on, basically. When was the last time you have debated a CCP or determining a CCP? When was the last time you had a debate determining the significance of an incident that you have at your factory, at your workplace? For example, positive salmonella or something, hopefully not positive salmonella anyway, but hopefully something smaller than that. We get these debates all the time, and that's a good thing, but also it can be not so good thing if the debates are not direct to the point, and if the debates are taking us so long or too long. So it's good to take care of food safety, of course. This is what we have been talking about today, and you need to do it because you are protecting consumers all around the world. The businesses that we work for ship products globally, and it is you who's keeping consumers safe. If you talk to the average consumer, they might not know that you exist as a food safety specialist because they don't know that it takes a lot of work to make the product safe. But luckily, you do exist, and that's a good thing. So you are keeping the product safe, and the rest of it, protecting consumers, protecting brand. But not only that, you are reducing food waste, and that in itself has a great impact or positive impact on the planet. And you are definitely helping the economy, increasing productivity, supporting trading and facilitating export and the rest of it. And also your good food safety work is definitely supporting the healthcare system and reducing the pressure on them. Doing all of that is great. And you should be proud of yourself, really, because you are doing all of that. But it's not easy. And today we were talking about challenges in the regulatory requirements, whether in New Zealand or overseas. These requirements do change and we have to keep up. We spoke about challenges with supply chain, and Kath spoke to us about that earlier. We talk about new requirements to the like of food safety culture, which we learned about again today, the allergen management and traceability, and you have to keep up with all of that. Luckily, we have an approach that will help us to produce safe food, and that is HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point, which we know. It has been around for more than 50 years, and in 1997, Codex Alimentarius decided to include HACCP guidelines in their document, General Principles of Food Hygiene. And it's great that they did, because at that point, we started to see harmony in what HACCP is and how it should look like. And this document that you're looking at is the core document when it comes to food safety. In my opinion, it's the Bible of food safety. You need to read it, you need to understand it, you need to know exactly what's in it. And Paul earlier today touched on a point, which is guidelines are great, but we need to interpret them correctly. And that's definitely true. My point today is we need to understand HACCP really, really well, because understanding the fine details is what will save you time and what will save you money, right? Let's talk about, actually, I didn't mention that this document has been updated in 2020, as you know very well. And in it, there are a lot of changes that we cannot cover in half an hour. Nothing totally new. However, there are lots of changes. There are great resources out there that you can look at and update yourself on what's in the document. And the best thing you can do is you read it, apparently, and that's what I recommend you to do. But today I will touch on some of these changes really quickly. And I would like to focus on one area, which is how to determine CCPs in the 2020 2020 Codex version, if you'd like. Some of the changes that you will see in the document is the structure of it, nothing major there, but it's worth highlighting that HACCP is now part of the document. And the clear message there is HACCP still the core of food safety. It's still the best approach that you can use. And there are definitely a lot of emphasis on the fact that you are the operator and it is you who's producing safe food. The responsibility is shifting more toward the consumer, toward you, the producer, away from the regulator. The regulator is there to set guidelines, to support industry, to help us out, but it's us who's producing safe food, and it is our responsibility. And of course, there are lots of extra clarifications around good hygiene practices. If you are working with a GFSI recognized standard like BRCGS, like Woolworth, which is not GFSI recognized, by the way, you are familiar with higher end PRPs or prerequisite programs and these specifics around good hygiene practices, good manufacturing practices. But if not, then there are some details for you in there that you need to be aware of. Definitely, one of the very, very important points I would like to talk to you about when we talk about good hygiene practices and the updates in Codex, there is a new concept called good hygiene practices that requires greater attention. When I first saw that probably 3-4 years ago, I can't remember, like we were commenting on the draft document. And to be honest, I was thinking, oh my God, are they adding an OPRP? And luckily, they are not. I'm not going to talk about OPRPs today because it will take us 2 hours and Jack will not be happy with that. But there are no OPRPs in Codex HACCP. It's just a PRP that requires greater attention. An example of that is cleaning a slicer for ready-to-eat product. It's PRP, it's cleaning, but you focus on it more by cleaning it more, monitoring it more, verifying it more. And that's all there. Definitely with good hygiene practices, there is a whole emphasis on allergens. The word allergen is mentioned 40 times in the new document. It's big emphasis. And Codex actually has published a guideline for allergens and how to manage them in the industry. And I'm aware that a group of scientists from the Allergen Bureau is part of the committee that came up with that standard, and they had like a huge input actually, which is great. Thanks to the Allergen Bureau, of course, TB. And another emphasis is on traceability. And Rika spoke to us about traceability, which is great. Of course, they talk about training and they talk not only about delivering courses, and this is something we touched on today. I think, Kevin, you spoke about it. It's not about delivering a course to someone. It's about making sure that they are competent and you teach them, they get the knowledge. You need to give them an opportunity to practice so they get the skill and then they are competent. And you need to assist that and update your training programs and refresh the memory of your team members. Basically, this is the expectation. Food safety culture. We have systems, we have food safety management systems certified to BRCGS, to SQF, you name it. This is all great. But at the end of the day, it's a piece of paper, or maybe it's a PDF file in your computer. It does not produce safe food. It's people who produce safe food. And people have behaviors, have beliefs, have values, have the way of doing things. And hopefully, when you hear people saying, this is how we do things around here, hopefully that's what's in the book. Because if that matches, it means you have a good food safety culture. And Kevin, you gave us great tips and all of that around it today, which is brilliant. So HACCP guidelines has been beefed up, if you like, and there are lots of explanation on how to do things, and it's all documented in there. But one area I'd like to talk to you about would be definitions. So definitions are super important. It is the language that we use to talk to each other, to communicate food safety risks and managing them and HACCP. We have to get the language right so we know how to use it and express ourselves and debate and move forward. Speaking of definitions and speaking of how to determine CCPs today, here is the definition of a critical control point. And by the way, it has been updated. This definition compared to the previous version, it has been updated. So I'd like you to take 20 seconds to look at that and pay attention to these keywords in there. Right. By the way, in the new Codex document, there are 13 new definitions and 10 updated ones. And you have to be fully clear on those if you'd like to know how to talk HACCP, because that's our language, right? So to understand what is a CCP and to be able to determine it, there is a bunch of definitions that you need to understand first. Not only those highlighted in green, but even another 4 or 5. So let's dive into a few definitions and then we will come back to this CCP determination. To start with, the very definition of a food safety hazard or a hazard in itself has changed. That's the old definition: chemical, physical, biological agent or condition of the food that can lead to harm or have the potential to cause harm. In the new definition, they took out the word or condition. And what does that mean to us? It means that if I'm keeping my perishable product in the chiller, temperature is high, that's a deviation. It's not a hazard. The hazard is the bacteria growing can cause harm. It's not the temperature. And that will have an impact on your HACCP plans. When you go back to your workplace, have a look. Have you identified hazards or have you identified conditions in your HACCP worksheets? And by the way, Codex now specifically asks to list the source of the hazard. When you say microbiological hazard like Listeria, E. coli, blah, 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 you need to say where does it come from. Write down the source in the HACCP worksheet. So that's hazard, something in the food that can cause harm. Deviation is a failure to meet a requirement. That's great. But we also need to understand what is a significant hazard. And that is important. So it's on the board for you to read anyway, but it's a hazard identified by a hazard analysis to be likely to be severe, and it is essential to be controlled. You have to control it. That's a significant hazard, and that's a key definition, definitely. And another definition that you have to understand before even talking CCPs would be control measures. And this is a game changer. Do you know that the new Codex document, up until today, it has no decision tree in it? And it has no decision tree, in my opinion, that's my own opinion, because of this definition. All right? Let me explain what does it say here first. It's any action or activity that you take that is capable of eliminating or preventing or reducing a hazard to an acceptable level. Cutting my fingernails, good hygiene practice. It does not eliminate E. coli in the product I'm preparing. It is not a control measure. Okay, so moving on. Now we can talk about CCPs. It's a step that has a control measure that is, it can be a combination, of course, that is essential to control a significant hazard. All right? So there is a combination of things there that need to be applicable to call a step a CCP, a critical control point. So just to practice it in a very, very simple way. And the very simple exercise that we will have together now is not about what outcome you will come up with. It's about how you get to that outcome. So the very super simple exercise we will have over 1 minute is looking at this flow chart. This is a process restaurant. They cook chicken. We all know how to cook chickens. Receiving, storage, preparation, cooking, packing, holding, serving. That's the process. I would like you to think, is cold storage a CCP? Is cold storage a CCP? And after you get the answer, which probably took you 3 seconds to take, or the decision had been made already, I'd like you to think, how did you come to that conclusion? Take a minute, try to think about it. It's not about, is it a CCP or not? It's about, how did you make that decision? Okay, so anybody is keen on sharing their opinion? Is it CCP? It is, or it is not? It is not, okay, why? Actually, let's start again, sorry.
Thank you. So now, for my experience, cold storage or any activity we are doing to avoid any further food safety issue is a PRP. And so this comes under PRP. And the CCP can only be if there's 100% control and every particle has a control, like pasteurizer. We have 100% control on every particle. But I can't say storage temperature as a controlling and deviating, because detection and rejection is a criteria for CCP. In this case, there is no detection and rejection also. So first definition, no 100%. Second is there is no detection and rejection. So based on that, I don't consider that as a CCP.
Sounds good. So we're saying it's a PRP, and that's fair enough. Knowing that, sometimes you might have a PRP, but based on the scenario, based on the workplace, you might make it a CCP, knowing that usually this is a PRP. So, but you're on the right track, definitely. Okay, anybody else still have time for that? Yeah.
I would also say it's not a CCP because the critical limit of, if the temperature deviates for 10 minutes, it's not going to cause an actual hazard of bacterial proliferation.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I know what you're talking about, and it is spot on, but I'd like to put it in the right terms. All right. These debates we can have. This is a very, very simple example, right? And it's just cooking a piece of chicken. And we know the answer. It's not a CCP unless somebody disagrees, of course. But what I'm trying to highlight here is the why and how we debate. And when you understand the fine details, it saves you time, it saves you money. So let's have a look at the definition. We're looking at cold storage. Is it a step? Yes, it's there in the flow chart. Do you have a significant hazards? Yes, biological. Do you have a control measure? Do you remember the definition of a control measure? Any activity you take that is capable of eliminating, preventing, reducing to an acceptable level a hazard, the hazard that you're talking about. Can the refrigerator eliminate the biological hazard that I have in raw chicken? So I don't have a control measure. So shall we debate for half an hour, or shall we agree that where is the control measure? There is no control measure next. Does it make sense? So understanding the language, understanding the process is what we need to focus on, and the decisions will happen very quick. And you save yourself half an hour and you move on. That can happen not only when you are building a HACCP plan, but also when you are looking at a problem. Is it significant? Do I have control measure for that later on in my process? You talk about it when you have a change to your recipe, when you have a change to your process, to your product, and so on. So that is what I wanted to highlight today, just one definition, CCPs, there is some 7, 8, 9 definitions behind it that you need to understand fully before you reach to this point. And by the way, if I go back to this slide, you cannot discuss CCPs without, basically, CCP is step number 7 out of 12, right? You cannot talk CCPs without doing the first 6 steps. And by default, we know what's the product, we know what's the process, we know what's the hazard, we know that it's significant. Then we moved into CCP determination. My advice is you should never debate step number 9 before step number 2. Always go back a few steps, then start from there, and that saves you time and money and stress, and you will still like your friends and colleagues, and you will not fight, and you'll be happy. Sounds good. So that's that. And I would like to remind you to learn about, before talking about this anyway, learn about HACCP, learn about the specifics. And there is a lot of little fine details in there that can help you. And read the document, number 1. If you'd like to know more about the updates, there is loads of them. There are some videos online, of course, that takes you through all of these updates. And you can join our, I don't know if I have a laser pointer here, but there is the Codex forum. Codex 2020 has a forum and food surety. We have some 400 people on it. The goal is to activate it, to turn it into a forum where we can collaborate. And of course, you can join us in our courses. And that's us. Thank you so much. And if we have time for questions, that will be brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Yes,
Thank you,
yes,
sir.
we do have time for questions.
Awesome.
So we have an expert here on HACCP. Take the opportunity, because we think we know it, but the amount of time I've spent in factories trying to explain HACCP is, well, a few years perhaps. So, any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think it must be 20 years ago now. I listened to a talk at IAFP from one of the founding fathers of HACCP in the food industry, Alex von Holy. And he made a comment there, and he said that HACCP is worth nothing if your PRPs aren't in place.
100%.
And then went further and saying that if you don't have good food safety culture, HACCP means nothing. Have you guys gone as far as to say that if there's a gap in your food safety culture that looks like this is how it'll impact the efficacy of your HACCP, or just a HACCP review, or how you build a new HACCP, etc.? Have you made that link yet? And any comments on best practice in that space?
Basically, as I said earlier, it's people who produce food, not the system. The book is great. We spend a lot of effort on it, whether it's only National Program Level 1 or FCP or HACCP Codex, or is it SQF? Brilliant. You hire someone, you train them, you give them induction, you give them the manual, they read it, they memorize it. 1 month later, do you think they will be doing what's in the book, or will they doing what people do? And if what people do is different than what's in the book, then what's the point? It's a good HACCP plan, brilliant. It doesn't make safe food. This is what we do. So basically, food safety culture is trying to bring what we do, this is how we do things around here, closer to where we want it to be, which is the QMS. So I fully agree, basically, like PRPs is the foundation. If your PRPs are not working, stop, put the pen down, forget about HACCP, fix your PRPs, then continue. 100%.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Just one input on HACCP, because very, I would say HACCP is the heart of food safety management system. So if it's not working, nothing working. So just on, when you talk about HACCP, particularly on the process industry, what do you think about the raw material HACCP? Because from my belief, if you have a gold in, gold out. So what do you suggest in Codex? Are they emphasizing on the raw material risk assessment and with the same methodology? Because when you talk to factory, we need methodology, because Codex or GFSI, everybody talk very generic. And there we need expert to develop some methodology. So everybody, even operator level, can perform the HACCP risk assessment, because it's not a enclosed room HACCP assessment. It's actually on shop floor, the people involved in. So how do you see from your expertise that the raw material risk assessment is coming in this Codex context?
Sounds good. When we identify hazards, we need to remember that hazards come from 3 different places. It comes from the ingredients, the food, and this is actually 2 parts. It's the food coming from the previous step to this step, the input at that step, right? So it's the ingredients, the food itself, the whole lot, plus environment, plus the process itself. So by default, you have to think of your ingredients, and you have to know what hazards it may bring to your process, and you have to manage it. What does Codex say about that? They didn't specifically say you have to do separate assessment on that, then you move into the process. Some people do, some people do it in the same time. But what Codex said, I'm not sure if I mentioned it today or not, but what they are saying in the latest version of HACCP is when you document your flow chart, you have to include inputs, outputs. And probably this is exactly what you are talking about, because they're saying you have to highlight the inputs, the outputs in your flow charts, which means when you look at the step, you know what's coming in and you need to identify hazards. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, I think we want to set up for the forum, this panel discussion. So thank you, Ray, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much. Thanks.